Hello, welcome back to Cubs and Culture for January 2nd, 2018. Wrapping up our discussion of the Best Picture race between The Hurt Locker and Avatar. This particular race has always sort of interested me for two reasons. The first one is both films are really good, but in very different ways of doing the same thing. They both transport the viewer into sort of the world or experience of their two worlds. Being a bomb tech in Iraq in a sort of hyper realistic docudrama sort of way, where you always when you're watching The Hurt Locker, especially during some of those action scenes, you feel the oppression and tension and sweat and adrenaline of being moments away from dying. Whereas Avatar transports you into a world with its 3D effects, its art direction, its CGI, its sort of openness to different sort of points of view, into a sort of Pandora green hippie sort of mental space, and in that way it's a striking experience. So both these films end up having sort of the main claim to fame for both of them isn't really commentary or anything like that. It's just the experience of being in those worlds. Now, with that being said, I think Avatar is ultimately better because it didn't aim for commentary, and The Hurt Locker did. It aimed lower and hit the mark. Hurt Locker aimed higher and missed the mark. The other sort of thing that I find interesting about this particular race is because of the way in which our country is being divided for like 30 years, but especially since Bush was in office, and of course it kicked up in 2016 with Trump. Both these films comment on the Iraq War. The Hurt Locker pretends not to comment, but it's still ideological because it ends up putting us in a space where we were trying to sympathize with our troops. The Big Questions doesn't encourage it. It ultimately thinks it's okay that we are in Iraq, whereas Avatar doesn't. And for all its ham-fistedness, Avatar is straightforward. Hurt Locker isn't. It pretends to not be ideological, but it really is. And so it's funny to me that when the movie came out, and this happens all the time, anything that's even remotely left of center, and Avatar is hardly left of center. It's slammed for being political, whereas something like The Hurt Locker is not seen as political, when in fact it absolutely is political. Now, in the context of The Hurt Locker, Bigelow's style of just the facts, while it's misleading and annoying, and it's not ultimately being honest about its intentions, she doesn't really justify anything that's not morally, and it doesn't have a lot of moral gray. I mean, or it does have a lot of moral gray. I mean, what should a soldier do if they are ordered to fight in an unjust war? Do you still follow orders? Like, I'm not too upset that she's justified the Iraq war sort of incidentally, because because the film's not interested in that question. On the other hand, she does take this sort of thing much further in Zero Dark 30, where she ends up sort of justifying torture. Sort of the same way, because she's interested in the psychology and the big questions that occur to the characters. Whereas, for all the problems with Avatar, it did annoy the right wing, including Pope Benedict. He condemned it for being pagan pantheism, which, apart from anything else, delights me. But at the end of the day, what we have here are two films in two different genres who are good at doing the sort of the same thing, being experiential films, not intellectual films, experiential films, who capture a moment in time about this sort of major issue in our country of trust and whether or not what sort of government we're going to have because of invading Iraq because of the oil or for terrorism or anything like that. However beliefs you have to think of it, it's probably the most substantial thing that's happened in my lifetime other than Trump being elected. And this is one thing I think these films might be remembered for as sort of this dual contrasting moments in time about the Iraq War, which is why I return to them about once a year and why I just wanted to talk to them about today. Okay, so I'm almost at 6 minutes. So tomorrow I'm going to do a retrospective on the Cubs 2017 season. So join me for that. I hope you have a good night. The Cubs and Culture signing off.